We do use this word, the Eura family, a lot, and we use it in the board. And from the board members who are here, you'll know, how those discussions go. But it really is a family, and to be here with all of you in this amazing location is seriously, as I've said to many people, hashtag I love my job. We have a rule in the board when we come to decide on the program for the conference. We sort of have a rule which is never look backward, always look forward. Always keep Eura being a forward-looking, striving association. But for once, on the 20th anniversary, we felt it was appropriate to look backward in order to look forward. So that's what we hope to do this morning. So I'm Dom Tidy. I work with Eura. Peggy, would you like to introduce everybody else?
Sure, thank you. Thank you. So we have Helmut Berg. I think most everybody knows this esteemed panel. We have Helmut Berg, we have Patrick Oman, we have Ken Barron, Anita Meyer, and Beverly Mayhew. And thank you for joining us today.
So one of the things that came out of the last session, which I thought was very apposite, was the phrase, we move the people who move the world. That's what our industry does. And these people up here on the stage have been moving the people who move the world for, well, in combined years, I don't want to say, but probably a better part of a couple of centuries. So my first question would be, what's your story? And I'm going to put that to Ken first, because he's brilliantly written an elevator pitch, which, for those of you who don't know, is if you met Steven Spielberg in the elevator of the Shard in London and you had 36 stories to pitch your movie idea, would he take it? So, Ken, pitch away.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here. So I'd like to start with my family business, as many of you know, was acquired by Court in 2001, and my first adventure to the other side of the pond occurred in Dublin to attend the Eura Conference, exploring a group of like-minded relocation industry types that professed to represent a goodly number of relocation companies throughout Europe. And the number of international and multinational companies at that time that were doing business between the two regions was roughly equal in number. So Fortune 500 companies, I believe the number was close to, in the early 2000s, was about a little shy of 400 each. And furniture rental as a business operating in the US did a lot of work with expats. So the question was, when I came to work for Court, could I create value by creating an opportunity for Court to be able to leverage the relationships with the Fortune 500 companies that we did business with in the US overseas. So my initial conversations with Tad and Dom were filled with uncertainty. I smile when I share the story, but I was one of those Americans who wanted to join Eura, representing a large American company offering a service that very few people knew existed. And the European contingency wanted to expand geographically, yet didn't understand how furniture rental fit into the relocation model. And were they, Eura, making the right choice from a people perspective? How well would these Americans interact with us Brits or Europeans? So what I've learned over the years: venture out of your comfort zone. The other person probably feels similar. Develop relationships, get to know people first. Trust is a cornerstone of any relationship. Take baby steps. So brand recognition for Court, when we first started, who is this company? Who are the people? What is the service? We chose to do the brand recognition first, and it took a good 3 years by coming back and visiting that people said, oh yeah, you're that person with Court. And acceptance of the service occurred when usage increased as awareness of the service was made available. And number two would be participation by quality local partner participants who were added to the network. It expanded the footprint. And then having Court's parent company, Berkshire Hathaway, become more globally recognized certainly helped in the creation of the awareness. So in 2001, Eura was predominantly a European organization. That was my perception. Today, Eura has delegates and operates in multiple regions and has representation in 95 countries. So attending Eura has allowed me the opportunity to experience, in 17 years, history, culture, currency exchange. Every time I come to a new place, I go home with extra money that sits in an envelope that never gets used. Varieties of food, local people, religion, transportation. Everyone has a different way of getting people around. Fears, celebrations, local laws and customs, and encountering business from a different perspective, allowing me to have a better understanding of the people we serve. So Tad and Dom have transitioned themselves and their organization and their delegates, Eura, representing the European relocation industry, to operate in a global environment. And I applaud their outreach to redefine their customers and their objectives.
Thank you, Ken. That's extremely kind. That was very eloquently put. Thank you. Two things that come out of that for me, and Peggy, I mean, hopefully we can go back to one of them, which is what have you learned? That's a seminal point. Will you ask that question later on? Because I think, you know, what we want to get from this is what have you learned? And again, I would like to now, leading on from what you said, come to Anita, because you touched very eloquently on how Eura has become more global, and obviously that's been quite a theme here since the beginning when Stuart opened up talking about the fact that, you know, we are now branding that international conference as Eura Global. Eura, by the way, stays the same. It's just that conference that's called Global. Anita, first of all, what's your story? And second of all, tell us a little bit afterwards about your mission when you were president.
Okay, that's a combination of two things, right? Okay. The story, by story you mean what's the company story? Why did I ever set first steps into the relocation world? I didn't even know it existed way back then. I stumbled into it. But looking back at it for after 20 odd years, I couldn't have done anything else, I think. I am an interpreter, so languages was not an issue. My parents were expats, so I knew the problems. And I was working in HR. So what the hell else could I have done? But again, I didn't know it existed. So that's the story of the beginning. It grew from a one-woman show into a medium-sized relocation company, and I feel here like Calimero in this panel. These are all such big companies, left and right, and okay, don't eat me.
Helmut and I were having that conversation this morning. I went to your offices. You are not a small company.
The Eura part of your question, I am very passionate about Eura. I'm a Europhile, if that's a new word. And living through those 20 years of Eura, seeing what Ken just said, that the momentum and the input from members from all over the world, not just those Americans from the first days, they come from everywhere, and it's such an enriching experience. Again, Eura is by the members, for the members. We breathe members. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's all about you out there, and I think Eura has to give back to the people that show their interest as much as we can in terms of training, in terms of reaching out, in terms of going there. So that's, to me, the global idea.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. It is something we're going to come back to because I want to go through your journeys through Eura. But catching on to the global idea, Beverly, please tell us your story because you're not European.
Really? I have learned how to say hello and thank you in 17 different languages. So doesn't that count? No. My journey began actually with my corporate world of Monsanto in 1976. So I have been involved in the industry since 1976 with my own brand, Orientations, since 1981. And while I worked on the relocation side in HR at my former employer, Monsanto, when I moved abroad as a new bride in 1981, my late husband and I were given a one-way ticket to Singapore, which can be both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that it's Singapore. The curse is that it's the best expatriate assignment one can have in Asia. So anything after that was a downward spiral. There was no relocation or DSP business in Asia at the time. And having just graduated with an MBA, I thought, I cannot sit by the pool and slosh gin and tonic all day.
Why on earth not?
So I came up with the idea of a destination service provider, named it Orientations because after all, we were in the Orient. And the rest is history, 17 countries later. So it's been an outstanding journey. My Eura journey was actually, I was invited into Eura by a colleague who said, it's very much like a family. But I came into it very late. My first Eura conference was Mallorca, I believe.
Really, was it?
Yes.
Oh, that's recent.
Yes.
Yeah, 2010.
So,
Wow.
yes. But I was always involved with the providers. I just didn't know actually that much about Eura. So it was very pleasant to come into this environment, to be able to share in a very open environment with others who held the same passion that I did. Those who know, I sold the business successfully, and the transition was outstanding. So now I have all this free time on my hand.
We'll make good use of it, don't you worry. We will shamelessly exploit your good nature. Thank you very much, Beverly. Just so that you know, there is a theme. The reason why we're teasing out these stories is because we're going to move on in the second half of the session. Helmut Berg, my friend, what's your story?
Well, my story is most probably a bit different to the one we have heard. I was coming to the industry out of unemployment. And the unemployment happened because I was responsible as a European manager for a company owned by IT&T. IT&T decided to divest from this activity, so there I was, and I read a newspaper ad offering a tremendously new job in HR as general manager. So I applied for it. I went through it, and to make a long story short, I won, among others, against my former general manager. So I got the job, and it was with PHH, Peterson, Heather and Howell. At that time, the biggest relocation company in the US and probably in the world. However, not to be compared to a relocation company in our days, because their main business was home sale, which we in Europe never have touched. We tried, but since the market conditions had been so different compared to the US, it never emerged. It never really worked, except in the UK, where the laws, etc., had been similar. So I started to work for PHH in Frankfurt. I had 3 employees, and I had the privilege and the luck that my mother company took all the losses I created. And I was allowed to do so because they said it's absolutely needed. It's a brand new service. If you want to implement into the German market, you need to make losses, and we will see what's happening. Now, we saw what's happening, and that was that in the US, some banks went into high jeopardy. Some banks had financed PHH at that time. So again, my mother company had to divest from Europe. And there I was, and I made the decision because in the meantime, I really loved the business and I was convinced that it will have a future. So I decided to become self-employed, and that was in 1990. And since then, until 2014, when I successfully transferred my business to someone else, I was in the industry. Now my story with Eura. At some ERC meeting, I bumped into Ted at the bar, of course, where else? And we talked to each other and shared opinions, etc. And I told him that a couple of years before that, I tried to establish a German association, or an association in Germany, because I was convinced from the very beginning that such a new industry, such a new service needs some background that it can demonstrate to its clients that it's not just happening as it comes, but that it is based on some solid development of quality, etc., etc. After 5 days looking into the opportunities to build an association, I gave up because it was, number one, too expensive, number two, too complicated, much too legal, and would have taken far too much time from my real business to run the company. So I was in touch with Tad, and Tad mentioned that there was a British association, ARP. So I became member of the ARP. So I had what I wanted. I was member of an association, if not in Germany, at least in the UK, so I could use these arguments for my acquisition for clients. And then came Eura. I was not instrumental involved in it, but I was one of the first members. And then had my first conference in Barcelona and was a speaker there. And then I was invited to become, I always forget.
You were co-opted, I think.
I was
co-opted.
co-opted.
It was like,
have you ever been co-opted?
It's not the same as it sounds.
It's interesting. You are allowed to work as hard as the others, but
you have no vote, no voice.
But you're not called
Taxation without
council
representation.
member. So later on, I became council member. All in all, I served for 7 years, and 3 of them I was proud to be the president. And I tried to do my best in order to pursue my philosophy of such an organization, and this is to bring forward the basic idea of quality, quality, quality. And what I always try to bring across is that you, the members, should not expect that your organization, Eura, is making revenue for you. This is not the purpose of this. The purpose of Eura is to create instruments and tools to give you on hand that you might use to make your business successful. That's the way around.
Yeah, thank you very much, Helmut. And I know that's something we had a lot of conversations about. And in fact, yesterday when we were briefly discussing this session, Ken, you asked a really interesting question about that, which was, was Eura set up with the remit of providing a commercial benefit directly to its members? Which, Helmut said no. It was always set up to be able to provide the tools that would then enable members to have a commercial benefit. So that's why it was always not for profit. Patrick, what's your story?
You told me to describe my journey, and my journey literally is a journey because I was in the van and I began driving my own truck. I was me, I had a van, I could move home for people, and I did that, and this was in the 60s, and I discovered the ferry began between Ireland and England, and in 1969, so I was probably the first guy to actually do an international move out of Ireland in a van. And I did that, and then I got a second van, and then I built the business. This was all pre-technology, so it was actually a lot easier. Somebody said, would you advise people to try and start a business now? Do you think it would be as easy again? I don't know whether technology makes it easier or whether it makes it more difficult, but I know in those days we didn't have it, but I knew how to drive, I knew how to pack, I knew how to load, I built the business. I was the first one to get a mobile phone. The phone was mobile, but the battery was enormous.
Yeah, it was still pretty flash though, right? I mean,
So I was very lucky that my office was in the front of the van. And we didn't have email, we had the telex. And the great thing about the telex was that once you got your presentation and your ability to quote and your prices all done in little holes on that long tape, which I had pinned to the window because that was the only way you could read them, I could find somebody with a telex if I needed to send a price to somebody and just feed it in, and it tick, tick, ticked, and that was great, marvelous. But I began to realize that here I was, a man in a van, and I was punching way above my weight. And although I built the business into sort of more people and more trucks, I was still a very small business, and I discovered that if ISO 9000 came out, and I discovered that if I could somehow apply ISO 9000 to what I was doing, I would be recognized around the world as having a standard that, the business was coming in from the US. They didn't know whether Patrick Oman was driving the van or whether he was like Bill Grable with 700 of them. And so I got ISO 9000, and I was invited by a sister organization to Terry Heads, the NMSA, the Moving and Storage, National Moving and Storage Association of America, to come over and tell them, how I did it. They thought I was this amazing corporation in Europe that had this European standard, and I'd come over and describe the whole thing. They didn't know I just stepped out of the truck. But I went and I told my story, and I began to discover that these associations were there. And if you were a member of the association, I joined Household Goods, suddenly they gave you a lot of credibility, and they sort of validated your business. And so that was the second thing I discovered.
Can I ask a question? So, I mean, at the time that you joined Eura, you actually were not Relo, you were moving. What made you join what was predominantly a Relo association?
Well, that was funny. I went to ERC. I went to ERC to discover what it was about Relo, because Relo had begun to impact on the moving. Suddenly, the movers didn't have the customers. And I went to ERC to find out what it was all about. And they weren't very welcoming of the moving fraternity. They treated us like we'd come in on somebody's shoe. I remember Gordon Kerr and Jonathan Howard met me there. And Jonathan used to say, when I'd walk into the room, sort of slight smell of diesel. But I still found those people very welcoming, and they actually introduced me to Eura and introduced me to Relo. And I thought Relo is fascinating because here's a bunch of people who've actually packaged what I'd been doing on the side. People would want to know about where they were going to live if they moved to Ireland, and I'd send them a copy of the Irish Times property supplement, because you could still do things by post then. And now, if something appears on the internet, it's gone in 20 minutes. But I discovered the Relo, and Liz Hennessy invited me to Portofino to speak about moving. And you had already come to Dublin with the conference, and I sponsored it, and I thought, these guys, I met Tad, I met Dom, they were very welcoming, and they made the whole thing very accessible. And I sold the moving company, dedicated my time and efforts into the Relo. found my way into Eura, and then was invited onto the board, much to my surprise. I thought,
Because you were voted. There was actually an actual election when you came on. Yeah.
I was invited to stand for election,
yes,
and unfortunately won. And then it was an opportunity to sort of pay back and tell people what I had done and how I'd made things work and how I'd made it appear to be bigger than you really were. Helmut introduced the Eura Quality Seal. This was right into my way of thinking because I'd benefited so much from having a standard before. And the training was also very, very good. And I built my company, and it was very successful, and has been very successful, and so much so that I sold it, and it actually sold itself twice. And now I'm at payback time, and I've reinvented myself as a consultant to sort of help other people through my experience to plan strategically for their futures in our relocation business.
It was very interesting. Yesterday we did a session on mergers and acquisitions, how to value your company. And I think one of the things that came out of it for me was what you said about the fact that when you have something so intangible as a relocation business, having something like ISO, the quality seal, training of your people, that's a saleable, an actual valued part of the company.
I couldn't agree more.
So actually, I have a series of questions for everybody, and I'm just going to ask you in random order, and they're short questions. The first question that I'm supposed to ask you is, what have you learned over the years? And some of you have already touched on it, but let's just briefly kind of recap, and I'll start with Helmut. What have you learned over the years? I mean through the industry, not just in general. We might be here a long time if you...
What have I learned over the time? Is it on? Yeah, it is. What have I learned? When you're in business in an industry like that since 1987, and it is easily to imagine that you have experienced a lot of gains, a lot of losses, a lot of catastrophes, a lot of highs, a lot of all kinds. And every time you go through this situation, such a situation, you learn something from it. Either you learn how to do it better next time, or you learn how to avoid a critical situation or activity the next time. So it is extremely difficult to pinpoint one element to say, that is what I learned. However, I thought about that, and I dared to mention one thing, and that is something I strongly believe in, and that is stakeholder value. I am, from the very beginning, not a believer in shareholder value. I think shareholder value is leading the economy in the wrong direction, especially an economy where you are mainly in service that is people related. And what other business is more people related than relocation? I mean, it's incredibly so. From the very beginning, I had my first half employee. Every time I gave a presentation and a speech, I pointed out that our philosophy is stakeholder value. The shareholders itself, yes, of course, the vendors, the employees, and the providers, and the clients, the clients. So if you concentrate on taking all their interests in a balanced equation, you might not maximize your profit. But this is another thing. Maximizing profit, I think, is not what we are here. Optimizing profit is a much better word because it really serves everyone. Yeah, that's what I followed. And by the way, you could do that even in times when we envision more and more obstacles like compliance and technique, IT, etc., etc. But the umbrella philosophy of stakeholder value still is valid, I think. It very much depends how you treat your employees, how you lead them, not treat them, how you lead them. It very much it depends on to the success of your company how well you relate to your clients and to your vendors. The vendors are always so forgotten because they want to live as well. I mean, we cannot complain that we are squeezed by our fees when we at the same time squeeze our vendors to go down with their fees so that we can imagine they cannot make their living out of it. How dumb is it to force a vendor to offer for or to deliver for a price that I as an entrepreneur can see that he cannot make a living out of it? This isn't working. To make a long story short, this is what you asked. Stakeholder value is what I learned, and I will continue to that.
Thank you, Helmut. You know, it didn't just occur to me, but it's occurring to me over and over. You guys are awesome, and what a fountain of wealth from all of you. And thank you. But we're touching on issues that have just come up. In my case, I've been involved in this industry for 25 years, I think, 25, probably more. And every year it's the same. There's a different twist on it. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. This moment, I'm gonna go to Bev. I'm just gonna go in random order. So what have you learned over the years?
What I've learned over the years is the easier you make something look, the more competitors you create. Is one thing. In the DSP world, when I started back in '81, you really didn't have to be a rocket scientist. You just had to have a caring heart. And we learned very quickly, the more you gave, the better your company profile developed and you moved on. The other thing that I learned was you really had to learn how to play on the big playground. I come from a time when all of our sales were direct. You just had to know the wife of the chairman or the vice president or something. You would have lunch with her and she would be crying on your shoulder how hard it was for the move. And you would say, well, if you had a way to make that easier, do you think someone would be interested? And the first time I made a sales call, they said, oh my God, where have you been? And so, but then over time, the pie became smaller because we did make it look easier. And the revenue streams went from pure DSP to then there was immigration, then there was property searches, then there was insurance, and then there was airline travel. And I remember there was one point in time in the early 90s when there was a company who has 3 initials, but they keep changing their name, who shall remain anonymous, had the intent to, when you checked into your hotel room, you know how they have the buttons on the bottom when phones still had those? You would press one button for a mortgage, another button for a rental car, another button for, and there were about 8 buttons, and it was all owned by the same company. So what I learned was you really have to play well with all of these people who come into the industry, who become involved in a revenue stream that continues to shrink, but you have to be the best at what you are.
Good. Thank you. I think I'll go quickly to Ken, who has actually already answered this question, but do you want to recap what you've learned?
I'll change it a little bit. So my perspective is when I came to court, so I'm going to look back over the last 17 years, not the prior 30, but create relationships first and conduct business second. And I think in a global society, what I see happening is that business is becoming the most important part of the dialogue and that the relationship is an afterthought. Develop trust and mutual respect to be able to work below the radar and show your Achilles heel when you're working with somebody else. And together you will be able to harness the strength of your respective companies and resources to create something more dynamic. So I would term that teamwork. Two more is when you have concluded a deal, leave crumbs on the table. You want to be able to shake the other person's hands and not have to count your fingers. So I would say make it mutually beneficial. And lastly, integrity is everything.
Boy.
I'd love to pick up on that just briefly, because that's exactly what when Dave Coplin, our opening keynote, was saying about the future of work and the future of our economies. It is all going to come down to personal relationships, trust, empathy, and communication. Thank you for that. It was brilliant.
I hope somebody's writing down all these words. Integrity, passion, relationships. And again, in my relocation life, it's always been the same. So, and it's really so comforting to know that that's not going to go away with all the changes. Anyway, let's go to Anita.
What have I learned?
What have you learned? Very
Have I learned
briefly.
anything?
Is that your answer?
I'm still learning every day. But if I try to look back on those 20 years in the relocation industry, make a plan and be prepared to change it. I think I made 1,000 plans, and then the customer came up with a different idea and needed a different service, and I had to throw sort of everything out of the window and start again. So be very, very, very flexible. Never think you're gonna get to the end of the year with that plan. The second thing that I feel very passionate about is the team. The team you work with is everything in this people business. It's not just the providers, it's not just the expats, it's not just the customers, it's your team. They're in contact with the customer, they're your business card, they're the ones that are, without them you're nada, nothing. And probably the thing that I learned and that a lot of people around me are jealous about is there's no business like relo business, honestly.
Thank you. That's great. It's not really my turn to answer the question. I'm not asking myself, but I want to say that everything you said, to add to the list of words, flexibility, and it just, you just hit on really all the basics, and we could write, if anybody is looking for redoing their set of values for their company, we'll give you the list of words because I think that's really, really, really what you need. And also I wanted to say I learned early on, and I guess I probably already knew this, but somebody through the years questioned this. You really do have two very important customers, your external customers and your internal customers. So thank you for saying that, because that's your team, your internal customers, because they count on you. Okay. Patrick, did you learn to be a better driver, or what did you actually learn?
How many tickets did you get?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to add to all of those. Helmut certainly took away all the things that we might have come up with, but yeah, well, thanks to Helmut. But what I did learn is that professionalism is important, and our organizations, such as Eura, help us to become more professional. And these great challenges that we meet, particularly compliance, are not really challenges, they're opportunities, because if you can show very quickly that you are the company that is completely compliant, then you will get the business. And GDPR came in just as I was getting out, just in time. But I think if I wanted to build my business into the future, that would be the first thing I'd want to demonstrate, that I was fully compliant, and that then I would be the company of choice or the provider of choice when I'm in a competitive situation.
That's great, because it's always better to be prepared for that than to just have a client say, okay, now here's this long list of things that you need to comply with.
Yeah.
So Got it. That's great. So, Dom.
Well, I had a whole list of other questions based on what we talked about yesterday, but really and truly, I think given everything that you've said, I want you to bring it back to that final one, and I think we should look at that. I think that's
Okay, well,
much more
the
important.
final question is actually 2 questions. So I'm going to just do the first one, so very quickly, short, because then the second one is longer. Okay, and I'll just go down the row, starting from here. So now what? How have you embraced change? Bev.
My embracing of change will carry through to continuing to mentor those in the industry, because nowhere along the way did I ever do anything alone. And I found that the more I shared, the more I got back. So I will continue in my mentoring role.
Perfect. Anita, what about you?
It's
Embracing
too early to ask me that question.
change. Fair enough.
I worked with the company that took over until the 31st of December in a very, very intensive way. And I love that. I love the transition and to see 1 and 1 is 2 and becoming one then, those 2. And ever since that day that we stopped working together like we envisioned from the beginning, I'm now looking around and trying to see what's out there and what's going to be next. I have not yet entered the transition phase, I'm afraid.
I disagree. I think you just summed it up. Your embracing of change is exactly what you're doing and what you've done.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Ken?
So I would say I'd be more optimistic in the sense that every obstacle that I have experienced in 45 years of being in business, I've learned not to take it at full face value, find a way to make it turn into a positive so that you're constantly evolving, changing. Things that you plan for don't happen. Things that you don't plan for, trends, economies, things like that, economics, things of that sort, do affect what you're doing, but can be a positive. Opportunities for a merger or a business or whatever may not happen. People, you meet good people, you meet people that you didn't anticipate along the way who help you. So it's more of a bigger, broader perspective that being optimistic more so is and embracing what's happening, the change, is a way to go.
Perfect. I love it. Patrick.
Thanks for asking me the question. What I see is that in the future I have more of an opportunity to give back, give back from my own experience. And I was very happy building the business. I was very happy contributing on the board of Eura. I absolutely loved all that. And I love the things that we did. I love the things we did together. And now I've got an opportunity that was given to me by Tad and Dom, who suggested that I become a consultant to companies who want to make a strategic plan, and perhaps I could share my experience with them. And I thought, yeah, why don't I do that? And that's a great opportunity for the future. So I'm not retiring. I'm looking forward.
Great. And Helmut.
Well, I have the feeling that I'm the only one who really enjoys retirement. I am more or less out of the industry, except one thing, and this is on the tip of my tongue, I have to say that. That's the Eura Index. Whenever you have heard about it, please fill out, send in, and keep me busy, because that's the only thing I do every month that really has close ties between me and Eura, and consequently between me and you. However, having been here and going home from this conference, I think what the conference, the Eura, when it comes to Eura, I have no doubt that the development will go further in the absolute right direction. And everyone who is planning for a career in this industry, and I can only follow what was said earlier, compliance and the Eura Quality Seal. I highly recommend that, because this is probably the strongest tool you have in hands to sell to your clients that you deliver quality.
I will pay you later for that. Thank you very much, Helmut. That's brilliant. No, seriously, that is fantastic. And Peggy, I want to ask you that question.
What question? Which question? The question, how I
How have
embrace
you
change?
embraced change?
All of the above. What all of my colleagues said and my friends. I love retirement. I do consider myself retired. I did sell my company 10 years ago, but I stayed on for almost 6 years. And so one thing I did do, which I would highly recommend to embrace retirement, which is a giant change, is try to do it gradually if you can. That worked for me, and I didn't plan it. I'm not that smart. It just happened. And so, but in the end, that was the best way, because I didn't have to just be working full-time one day and the next day try to figure out when all the classes at the gym were that I needed to go to, plus, who was going to be bumping into me in my kitchen, in my house. And that's a personal side of retirement that's very interesting. So what Helmut said is actually really great, because keeping busy is a giant benefit to someone else who might be living in your house, whether it's your spouse or your child or something else. So that's really good for me. And then I have the most awesome opportunity there is, and that's still working with Eura. So that's really, I've got a foot in every camp, and it's great. I love it. Yeah.
Final question.
Okay, final question. Okay, the question's kind of long. I think I'll go in the same order just so those guys know whose mic to turn on at the right time. Now, listen carefully. If, in 2018, you have a chance to meet your younger self, and your younger self has the same passion and entrepreneurial spirit that you have still, but you had 20 years ago or whenever, what would you tell your younger self about the idea to start a relocation business now? What advice would you give your younger self? And if it's just yes or no, do it, don't do it, that's fine. But if you have any advice for your younger self, but bear in mind that younger self, it's not you right now, it's the younger you right now in 2018. And based on, and knowing that you all have passion and all of those other words that, we've talked about. So, Bev.
What would I tell my younger self? I would probably tell my younger self to think out of the box more and to, almost in a supply chain approach, everything that could possibly be touched in mobility, you should look at to become involved in. If not directly, then through relationships. But I think that is what I would be doing. The other thing that I would do is to understand a better work-life balance.
Good one.
Because although you never turn off, particularly in your early years, it is always on your mind, but it's on your mind because of your passion. So I think I would either involve my family more, or I would try to turn off something.
Good luck. You probably won't be able to do that ever. But Anita, what advice would you give your younger self about starting a business? In
A relocation
business in 2018.
I've got two younger selves at home, a 25 and a 27-year-old, and they would probably advise to everybody their age, don't do it. It's 24/7, it's crazy business. But I still don't agree. I would encourage everybody with the technology and everything that's out there now. When I started, there was no mobile phone, there was no internet, there was no GPS. Look at what you have now. It's got to be, everything is there to make it work and to make you able to do more business in less time. So, and again, there's no business like relo business. If you're a people person, it's just the best thing you can be active in. And I would say join Eura and get as much training and as much information from your peers. Don't stay on your island. But yes, a very positive yes, go for it, do it. You'll enjoy it.
Great. Okay, Ken, how about you?
So I would say the ability to take yourself out of your shoes and put yourself in someone else's shoes to understand how might your business work, how might it be successful, what are your customers' needs, what are you building? Some people would say the more products and services they can offer one customer gives you an opportunity for a higher margin. Other people would say it's too complicated. I can't have that subject matter expertise and that I'll never obtain depth. I'm kind of on both sides on this because on one hand, we, from our generation, put a lot of, our ethic was 12, 15-hour days, 6 days a week. I don't think that's the lifestyle today. I think that there were a lot of technical abilities and capabilities today that we didn't have. And the world is becoming smaller. So I could play both sides.
Okay, so we have 2 yeses and a
Maybe.
maybe. Okay, Patrick.
Well, I'm a definite yes. Yvonne and I have a son, and like Anita, he's a younger me, actually, and he is chomping at the bit to get into business. And unlike me, the technology is second nature to him. He doesn't think of doing anything the way I might do it. He thinks immediately of the technology answer as soon as you're speaking to him about something. In fact, he comes to me constantly with business ideas. What do you think of this idea, Dad? I'm going to start doing car washing. And I said to him, Jesus, car washing, I mean, are you sure you want to do that? Yeah, he says, I'm going to get this app. And then the people in different apartment blocks can just punch the app, and I'll have a guy turn up in a van and do the wash. And I'll charge them, and I'll pay the other guy. I can charge them on their credit card. I can pay the other guy cash. And he learned that from me. And so he is thinking like me in terms of being an entrepreneur, but he has a lot of the technology already in his head. And I think he'll do very well. And if he gets into our business, becomes really into Relo and can master the technology we're going to have to face in there, he'll be a huge success.
That's awesome. And I know him, and that's great. Good for him. So Helmut, what is your advice to your younger self?
Well, I would, my younger me, I would also recommend that they should seriously consider whether they want to go into the business. Not make a rush decision, but consider it. And the point is, they have a big advantage against us 20 years ago or 25 years ago. They can ask others in the industry for their advice. We had none. We had no one to ask for advice. We had to start, and we had to create our own ideas and philosophies, and then we had to grow and make our checks and balances and tries and wins and loses, whatever. Now you can go to someone from Eura and you can say, can I have 2 hours and talk to you, because this is my plan. What would you recommend? What had been your experience in the past that you can tell me what I have to look at? And what I can say is, first of all, check the financial implications. I think it is more serious than in the past. Not only that you need more money to invest into build a business, you should also be aware that there is more money out in the world that will be invested to compete against you. So this is something that needs to be checked. Aside from technical, I mean, I have no doubt that the people that are today as young as I was when I started are technically much more ahead. So I'm far behind that. I'm not touching that. But what I would like to say also is check your ethics. Do you really want to become an entrepreneur, or do you just want to make money? If you just want to make money, you're in the wrong industry. This is not an industry to make big fortune. But if you are a real entrepreneur with all the consequences, then you probably do not find an industry that is more valid to be engaged in it.
I think if ever there was a reason to really respect the Asian model of respecting experience and wisdom, this panel have absolutely proved that today. Peggy.
Well, I have one last thing to say. You stole my word. I was just going to say very briefly or simply, and everyone knows this, there's information, there's knowledge, and then there's wisdom. So are you guys willing for anybody out here to get in touch with you? And Patrick, we know you have a consultancy about selling your company, but to share your wisdom.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
Consultancy yet, but that might change.
You could be an associate.
Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you, panel. That was fantastic. Thank you.